Well, good morning. The countdown clock hasn't started quite yet, but we are moving quickly toward the end of another year. What kind of year was it? We'll discuss that with our guest this morning, and that conversation starts right now.
From TV6, this is The Ryan Report. Here's your host, Don Ryan.
Well, as we've done in recent years, we like to take a look back on this last show of the year to recall some of the events and issues that had an effect on life in Upper Michigan over the past 12 months, and to look at some of the challenges ahead. Joining us this morning for that conversation is Amy Klickner. Amy has been in a leadership role with Lake Superior Community Partnership since it was created more than 20 years ago, and has served for many years as its CEO. Well, Amy, welcome back to our annual year-end show.
Well, glad to be here.
Good to have you with us. So, what kind of a year was it for LSCP?
Actually, it was a really good year, but that all is based on our business growth, and we've seen a lot of it. Seen a lot of startups, seen a lot of expansions. We're not dealing a lot with retention or trying to keep people in business. It's a very strong economy.
You know, people hear these stories about, Amazon putting thousands of jobs somewhere else. That really doesn't work here, does it? We have to deal with the companies we have, don't we?
Well, again, Don, I will always say the statistic is 80% of your growth comes from within. So what we spend our time on is nurturing from within. I would rather take 10-person companies over one 100-person company, because if the economy changes and that one goes out of business, it's not diversified enough, to continue to move forward. So, I'll take our small wins any day of the week over landing an Amazon that may or may not stay.
You're part of a national association that the partnership's part of. You've had some leadership roles there. You get a chance to see what's going on in other parts of the country. Are the trends there the same as here, or are we different, or how does it look?
It's funny you ask that, because the International Economic Development Council that you're speaking of, I spend a lot of time working there and in the leadership roles, and the challenges are the same. They're just maybe smaller on our part, where a bigger city may have a more of a massive, if their layoff is 35,000, ours might have been 35. So there's a difference in that way. The one area I would say that we are very, very different is a lot of the metropolitans are dealing with the income gap and lack of inclusion and things like that, where we're not seeing that quite as much yet, but a lot of times it's in the tea leaves as to where smaller micropolitans might be headed.
Is talent development still one of the key issues in economic development?
If you would have asked me that 8 years ago, I would have said not a problem. For the past 5 years, and expected again next year, talent is either the number one or number two issue. And I don't care where you are in the country, and I don't care what industry you're talking about. Talent is the issue. And
we're seeing a lot of changes, and we'll talk some more about that as the program goes on, but you really have to have people trained for the jobs that are there today, right?
Exactly. And we like to say, if we're training our young people to be oceanographers and wanting them to stay in the Upper Peninsula, that's not going to happen. So if you are looking to be in a certain area, you have to be able to choose a career that's going to fit that area. And you see that happening in Marquette County, where we're training all the way from certificate programs to master's degrees here for our young people to stay in the Upper Peninsula.
And they're making some real progress too, aren't they, in training people for the trades and for some of the real jobs that are out there.
It's just amazing. And I think the young people, we've turned a corner with that narrative, and the young people are flocking to doing what they want to do, work with their hands, work outside. In the Upper Peninsula, that's kind of what makes us hardy. And these are great family sustaining jobs with good benefits. If I could climb a pole, I'd be a lineman,
As we look back at last year, certainly one of the top stories was kind of readjusting again to divided government in Michigan. A Democratic governor, Republican legislature, haven't had that situation or the reverse for 8 years. Your organization works closely in Lansing. How do you look at the past year?
I would say it's a learning curve for all of us, and it's been a challenge. Especially when we got into the budget situation that, we've come off of 8 years of it being done in June or July and floated right into the rest of the year. This year was more challenging because of more partisan politics. I do think we are ending the year on a much better note with the line item vetoes, several of them put back in that were just critical for northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. There still are a few that need to be worked on, but again, instead of focusing on other things, the budget has taken so much time in the politics arena. We're learning, and it has been a little bit disappointing.
Your group for years has done an annual trip to Lansing. It's a very organized trip. It's not just a social event. And how did that go this year?
The Market County ambassadors go, and actually we do 2 trips now, one in the spring and one in the fall. We're very welcomed down there because we've been doing it for 50 years. But again, it's sharing information with our legislators, department heads, the governor's office, to be able to say what's important to northern Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. We also make a trip with the Northern Michigan Chamber Alliance to raise that voice, to include the 13 counties below the bridge that have very similar types of issues in the policy area. And I think our trips have been very, very successful, and we've seen good results from them.
One of the issues that Lake Superior Partnership has supported is the Enbridge Line 5 tunnel. Where do you feel we are with that issue today?
I think that's in a very positive place right now. I think if you look at what the alternatives are to making sure we move propane into the Upper Peninsula, I think the utility corridor, the tunnel, is the best option, and that's what our organization is supporting. But we have to remember, it's not just an Upper Peninsula issue. Line 5, it goes right through the state of Michigan into Sarnia and into Ohio, and it even includes, fuels for the airplanes at Detroit Metro that are made out of Toledo. So an impact to that line doesn't just impact those that heat with propane in the Upper Peninsula. It impacts the entire state of Michigan.
Be interesting to see what happens with that.
Exactly.
We'll get back to some more questions in just a couple of minutes. Back with more on today's show just 2 minutes from now. Again, our guest this morning is Amy Klickner. Amy is the CEO of the Lake Superior Community Partnership. Just reflecting a little bit on some of the things that happened during the year. We're not looking at major crime issues or any of those kinds of things, but just some things that affect life here. Before we leave state government, a couple of things. Pure Michigan, still a question about whether that will be funded. I know your organization is not involved in tourism promotion, but you do know that tourism is a very important part of our economy, right?
Right. I mean, tourism is economic development, and the Pure Michigan campaign has proven itself, worthy of the investments. I believe the last number I saw was for every $1 invested, another 9 were brought to the state of Michigan. And it's a cohesive campaign that all communities of any size can branch off of. And so hopeful that, they'll take another look at that as we head into the new year.
And the other thing is the dark store issue. Comes under many names, but we still can't seem to put that behind us.
We can't get any traction, moving the bills forward, and that's another disappointing issue because again, it impacts more rural communities, and not so much the metropolitan areas. So again, never give up, but we have not been able to get it taken up.
And as far as what's going on in industry, even though it's not what it was at one time, mining is still part of our history and culture. And we're still seeing some developments. It appears the Back 40 mine, which is controversial in Menominee County, may be getting close to being able to move ahead.
And it's funny because going through this with Menominee and watching what's happening, it's very similar to what we went through with what's now Eagle Mine. And they've met all their challenges so far. They've gotten all their permits. They're ready to go. I think it's just once they get up and running, the company proves that it can be done environmentally sound, with family sustaining jobs, with community buy-in. I think that they'll get there. They'll get their social license. I look at us now with Eagle Mine all these years later, what a remarkable company that Lundin is, and the companies that came before them, the jobs that they've provided, the give back to the community. It's been truly a win for our community and for the company.
And at this point, it's kind of a good news, bad news situation with the Eagle Mine in that they have, well, the good news is they've added the Eagle East project, and that is extending the life of the mine.
Right. So 2025, but and I know people talk about the boom and boost or boom and bust cycle of mining, but as an economic developer, I don't have any other company that can tell me when they're going to close their doors. So if we lose a manufacturer at the end of the year and we didn't see any red flags or didn't get any information or talk about it, there could be 80 people out of a job. We know and can prepare for an end of life of mine, and a community can be prepared, and we can move those employees elsewhere. So I think that as difficult as it can be to the people that are involved, it's a way of planning for your future economic development changes.
And unfortunately, they've really stopped their exploration at this point, I think, haven't they?
Right, they have, and they have announced that, and yes, it's unfortunate, but I also look back at, again, the family-sustaining jobs that they've given hundreds of thousands of people over the years that they've been here, and those folks pay taxes and spend money, and the cycle continues.
And we're still all waiting to see if there is another future for the Empire Mine. Anything new you're learning from your contacts?
No, nothing new. I mean, like we talked about when their CEO was here earlier in the year, it's a supply and demand situation, and they need a buyer. Now, my fingers are still crossed, and I still believe that we will get there someday. But right now, no news to report.
And of course, a surprising development was Cliffs getting into the steel business itself and really taking over a major steel company.
Right, and anytime a parent company makes a bold move like that to strengthen their portfolio and to strengthen their company, yes, it didn't directly open the Empire Mine the next day, but it does make their company stronger for the future for those involved in the Empire Mine and the Tilden Mine and the research lab here.
Another area of interest certainly is healthcare, and certainly we're concerned in the service it provides, but it's also, in many communities, the largest employer. And we saw at least a couple of very positive developments this year.
To have a $350 million investment in your community, again, as an economic developer, that's a big deal. And when they announced that when they were working on that in 2018, we had just under $1 billion of investment announced that year. And the only other year that that's happened since I've been at the partnership was the year that the Eagle Mine started, and we did hit the $1 billion. So not only are they a huge investor in the community, but for economic development, when a company is looking to come or expand or bring employees here, they want to make sure they have education, recreation, healthcare. I mean, we have an incredible facility to sell in this area with doctors from all over the world that are doing amazing things in our backyard. We're pretty lucky.
Of course, we're also very pleased to see Dickinson County Memorial Hospital staying in business and getting on solid ground.
Absolutely, that was a really important step. And again, the line item vetoes caused some rural health care problems, but those have now been put back into the budget. So we're glad to see that they're moving forward and strong. We do, as you know, work in Baraga and Dickinson County and provide economic development services to their teams there. And again, that's not just a major employer, but a huge asset to have health care in your community.
Okay, some more questions, just a couple of minutes. Back with more on today's show after we take this break. Again, we're talking with Amy Klickner, the CEO of the Lake Superior Community Partnership. Amy, the retail landscape is certainly changing, and just in the last year, we've seen Shopko, with many stores in the UP closing, and here in Marquette, Gander Mountain, Gander Outdoors, Office Max, even Fry Chevrolet.
Right.
It all seems to be changing.
It is, and it's funny because you and I have talked about this before too. I mean, it used to be when I was growing up, I mean, shopping was entertainment, and you went to the mall and that was fun, and you went to dinner and things like that. We're busy. There's the ease of Amazon and other online retailers, and there's so many other things to do that's not what a family typically does to recreate. So we're kind of seeing retail stores or malls kind of try to reinvent themselves, add entertainment in, maybe add data centers or call centers or some type of business anchor in them. But they always say things like this cycle, and so it'll be interesting to see if it does ever cycle back again.
So when it comes to replacing jobs, there are a lot of jobs being lost in that field. So it's kind of a constant effort, isn't it?
It is, and the thing is, when you start talking about losing retail jobs, it's a shift in some of them, and I think the number is smaller. But even if you look at checking yourself out, self-checkout, you don't need as many cashiers there. You need one or two roaming around to help. So it's back to the training aspect of, if you want to work in retail and you want to do this, being able to multitask, work with several customers at the same time, maybe be able to repair a self-checkout and things like that are going to be more of the jobs of the future in retail.
I've joked about the fact you can go into some of these stores now and never talk to a person in the store.
Yep.
Buy your things, check out, and be gone.
Yep.
It's just amazing.
Exactly.
I know one of the issues you're really concerned about is rural affairs and development. Tell me what that's about.
Well, truly, I mean, everything we talked about this morning, being able to be successful in it is, at the bottom is rural policy, public policy. And we think that there needs to be a lot more effort to separate micropolitan, rural, and however you are going to define rural, from the metro areas of the state of Michigan. There needs to be more of a voice and more advocacy in that area. 59 of the 83 counties are considered rural in the state of Michigan. So several organizations have come together to propose the Rural Affairs and Development Department to the governor, RAD for short. But truly what we believe this is, and what it needs to be, is across all sectors, so that we're talking rural policy in transportation, education, law enforcement, economic development, local municipalities. So when decisions are being made, we have someone at the table at a department level or a cabinet level that can say, hey, when you make this decision, this is how it's going to impact the rural areas of our state. Maybe we can figure out how to tweak this or change this or add this that would continue to allow them to be successful in this arena as well.
So these things now are kind of scattered throughout departments, and you want to see a department, not just you, but
right.
The group that's supporting this wants to see a cabinet level department.
Yep, exactly. And the thing is, no other state in the country has brought it to this level before, which is surprising because we have so many rural parts of America. We can be a leader. We can set the stage, set the bar for rural policy in Michigan by doing something like this. And then again, bringing all those areas together, so we're looking at it at the big picture and not just individually in departments or bills or legislation that are coming through, that we're looking at it more holistically in how it impacts rural areas.
Do you think you can find support in state government?
I think so. I mean, right now we have talked with some of the governor's staff. We have supporters of over 80 supporters across the state, including SBAM, the Small Business Association of Michigan, hospital associations, universities, municipalities, businesses that have all said, look, this is a good idea. We all can benefit from this. And again, it's not wanting to throw something at the wall and see what sticks. It's saying, how do we be part of the solution?
And speaking of state government, and we have less than a minute left, one of the big issues coming up next year will be an election year again, and that's always important.
It is, and whether you like politics or not, it's in our lives every hour, every minute of every day. The one thing I can say, and I think we can agree that it's not always positive, that there is a lot of negatives, but it has raised the engagement of people in the country for wanting to have a voice, wanting to hopefully be at the polls and vote. So I think overall, it's a good thing to get more people engaged in making the decisions of the people that are going to move our country forward.
And we'll see how that plays out next year.
Exactly.
Thanks for coming in this morning and talking to us.
Thanks, Don.
Okay. I'll have some other thoughts for you in just a couple of minutes. During today's discussion, we look back at some events and issues from the year just past. So as we get set to ring down the curtain on another year, I thought it could be fun to look back even further, back as far as my memory will stretch. And that's a fairly long time. And what I came up with was kind of an odd mixture of unrelated memories. Not necessarily important events, but those things from everyday life that are still floating around in my memory. For those of you who have been around as long as I have been, I hope this will be nostalgic. And for those a little younger, it's a story of how things used to be. For example, can you remember when you did most of your shopping at small, locally owned stores? Back in the days when the A&P store was the only chain store in many communities? And can you remember shopping before the internet? We did our surfing through the Sears, Ward's, or Penny's catalogs. And that issue that came out for Christmas was especially exciting. And parents often helped their kids look through the toy section to get some ideas for Santa Claus. And still thinking about shopping, remember when you could buy gas for your car for 25 cents a gallon? In fact, you could buy a new car for about $2,600 and go to the movies for 50 cents. And speaking of cars, there was a time when most of them came with standard transmission. So you had to learn to drive with a shift and a clutch. Driving with that clutch took a little getting used to. Do you remember when you picked up the phone to make a call and a voice at the other end said, "Number, please"? Seems like the telephone operator was always there to help you in an emergency, and sometimes with things that weren't all that important. Remember when long-distance calling was expensive, so you looked for ways to beat the system? Like, when you were traveling and wanted to let your family know you arrived safely, you would call home collect, and the person who answered the call would not accept the charges. The message they were waiting for had been received. And when's the last time you made a call from a telephone booth or a payphone? Remember when the most popular men singers were Al Jolson, Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, and Tony Bennett? Their songs still live on today. In fact, Tony Bennett is still singing today. And here's a memory that's a little off the beaten track. Do you remember when margarine was white in some parts of the country, like Wisconsin, the dairy state? I remember they called it oleomargarine back in those days, and some just said oleo for short. But back to the color. The dairy farmers wanted to make sure that margarine wasn't being passed off as butter, so they had legislation passed requiring that it be white. Included with each package was a little bag that contained yellow powder you would mix with the margarine when you got home so it looked like butter. So as we ring down the curtain on another year, it's a good time to recall that there are a lot of things that were very different in the past. If you can recall the memories I shared today, then you must have come into this life about the time I did. And if they're not in your memory bank, well, I guess you arrived a little later and perhaps learned something new today. I'll be back in a minute. Well, I've used up all my time for this week and for the year. It's been a fun year for me, and I hope for you as well. If you want to check out some of the shows we did this year, you can find them all at uppermichigansource.com, where you can see the latest news anytime. Thanks to Amy Klickner for joining us today to help us look back at 2019. Thank you for being here. Hope you'll join us again next year, and I hope you have a very happy new year.